uncle, and I know he was just as a bed bug, but nobody wanted to talk about it. And I, growing up in the church, I often struggled, well, okay, well, God is God and he's gonna help us through, but why are we still dealing with depression? Why are we still dealing with anxiety? So that really is what drove me to going into mental health and then pursuing clinical mental health and then pursuing school counseling, because guess what? Our babies are dealing with mental health issues and nobody is addressing that in the school. And then also the Christian clinical mental health, because as Christians, we sometimes think that we're exempt from dealing with these issues and they're affecting us as well. So that is really what drove me, I would say, or pushed me, or I guess, my God-leading ability just to kind of put me into this field of counseling. I do recall speaking with Tiffany, and she was sharing her experience of seeing the counselor about maybe 10 years ago. I was in the car with my mom, and we were driving, and I was a counselor then. I was seeing people, and I was seeing clients and seeing children, but I just felt so down and out. Had never pursued counseling myself. And my mom, being that one of 8 children from the South, told me, Daisha, I think you need to see somebody, because I can't help you through this. So we're here tonight to hopefully, just spark your interest and to encourage you that, hey, it's nothing wrong with pursuing mental health. There's nothing wrong with being well. It's a big kick on wellness now. Everybody's talking about wellness and meditating and yoga. It is nothing wrong with that. I think you said it. You had mentioned if your arm is hurting, you go to the doctor. I don't want to get in anybody's business, but how many of you know somebody who's dealing with hypertension? High blood pressure, taking medication, both of my parents, high cholesterol, sugar diabetes. My mom goes to the doctor every 3 months. She has to get blood work every 3 months, faithfully. And I wondered, well, if she can do that, why can't we go see somebody when we're dealing with some issues that we just don't know where it's coming from? And let me pose that question to you. Why do you think it's so difficult for us as people of color? Because guess what? In other cultures, they doing what they need to do. Why is it so difficult for us as people of color to really seek the help that we need for our mental well-being? I saw somebody here.
Stigma.
She's a stigma.
The stigma.
For black women, I think.
People see, and people don't think we hurt.
Right.
So we believe that we don't have pain. But black pain, I think, is one of the most unique pains that you can ever experience. Because our pain is always generational and collective.
I read an article a few months ago about the superwoman syndrome of black women, and how so many of us are dying from suicide, but not only necessarily suicide, heart disease as a result of the anxiety that we're dealing with and not getting the help that we need. Black men too.
Yeah, I was just about to say that.
Black men too. I see a few of y'all in here. We gotta be strong, we resilient. We don't cry, we don't need to cry. What for? Guess what?
You need to cry.
You need to cry. You need to speak to somebody. I heard the saying a few weeks ago that broken crayons still color.
Yes.
But guess what? Do we color as well as a whole crayon together? A lot of times we don't think about that. When I was a kid, my crayons used to break, and I used to try to get some tape because I'm like, I don't want to color with no broken crayons. that was me. I couldn't. I'm like, But a lot of times we don't take the time to put ourselves back together again.
Well, let's talk about before the breaking, because we all talk about the hypertension and the diabetes and the cardiovascular disease. And yeah, sometimes that has to do with our diets. But I'm walking into the 21st century where a lot of us are looking really fine in our 32s, right? So maybe grain, but and the symptoms are coming out. And so we say age. And I want to posit that, no, not age, undealt with pain and mental and emotional suffering. Because the stigma and the Christianity, and I'm a Christian, but first you deal with the stigma. If you decide you're going to go talk to someone about how you're feeling and what you're thinking and the pressure that you're under, they say, you're not crazy, you don't need a shrink. That's the first thing. I grew up with that, right? You need a shrink, and everybody laughs, right? The other thing is, if you're a Christian, you need Jesus, you don't need a shrink, right? And so you go to a Christian counselor. So you gotta go to one of your Christian counselors who is not certified. They've got a lot of Jesus, a lot of Jesus, and maybe a lot of world experience because they like a, big mama or the pop in the place or whatever. But no one is helping me with some real difficult situations that I'm going through. I am stressed out on the job. I'm feeling insecure about my future and things that are just piling up and piling up. So yeah, by the time I hit 50-something, I do have something wrong with me. What do we do with ourselves before we start developing the symptoms? Because it's not always that we're eating badly.
No, not at all. And there's a lot of studies that will tell you that even with individuals who are dealing with those types of elements, a lot of it has to do with our mental well-being, depression, anxiety. Okay, so what I would say to that, a lot of times,
The whole story. Because when you're looking at the people with hypertension, they're not trying to fit themselves through the door. When you're looking at the people who are dying from cardiovascular disease, they're not overweight, they're like you and I. How is it that, what happens when you see like a really mean person in your office? What's going on with them mentally? What do we do to show up, to help ourselves not get there? And most of all, to help our children not get there. Because if you ask me, children today, they're not having fun, they're not laughing, they've got so much stress. So how do we recapture a generation? And before we even recapture that generation, how do we recapture ourselves?
I think it kind of goes back to, I saw that you had a question, so I'll come to you in a second. But I think that it goes back to what Daisha was saying as far as like the awareness, and not just awareness about whatever is going on with you, but just awareness of what's going on in our society in general. And it doesn't necessarily have to stem back to slavery or anything along those lines. I could just think back to my things that my grandmother did, that then my mother did, then I do, like that type of generational history. But I think that the first part of the situation is to start having the conversation. And these conversations aren't easy to have, and they're not always comfortable conversations. But that's why a gathering like this is important, because now we're kind of normalizing, if you will, a conversation that may be uncomfortable for somebody, but you might be able to go home later on and say, we went to this event and we were talking about mental health, and we were talking about just wellness in general, and I think maybe I'll start doing this differently, or like you kind of pushing yourself to think in a different manner. I think that that's the first step, because a lot of times, and we talked about this, AMRILL, a lot of times people do think that if I don't act like what the TV told me crazy looks like, then I don't need any help. But you could see a therapist because you're going through different transitions in your life. It doesn't necessarily have to be this catastrophic thing that's going on. It's you are transitioning into a very different world when you've had kids who are now living on campus, and now you have this empty nest. That is a major transition that many people have a hard time dealing with, and sometimes you may even have to relearn your partner because now it's just the two of you again. But people don't necessarily think that that's a good enough reason, if you will, to see a counselor. So I think it's really having the same type of conversation about mental health that we have about physical health. And it may seem juvenile that way, but it really is just that simplistic. You really, no one would think twice about saying, oh, my allergies are bothering me, I didn't take my Claritin earlier this morning. But yet there's still so much stigma on a person saying oh, I forgot to take my medication today and my anxiety is on edge, or I'm on high. So I think it's really trying to make this a part of the conversation where it's just a regular day-to-day conversation. And then that is the first step, or one of the first steps to getting in front of it, if that answers your specific question.
And not being afraid to have those conversations with our loved ones, with our children. Do y'all know how many black kids, because I work in urban education, are dealing with depression? are dealing with suicidal thoughts, homicidal thoughts. Before I went into the school system, I was a psychiatric screener. So my job was to make assessments and make determinations if a child should be hospitalized or not. And I would have to sit with those families and say, you are not going to be able to take your child home today. If so, we're going to have to call DCP&P because your child needs to be hospitalized because your child has a plan to kill him or herself. And I cannot have that on my license, and this child has made an intent and has a plan. And parents will look at me like, but we never knew. What did you talk to your child? Did you know your child was being bullied? Did you know that your child had been molested? These are some things that we don't want to talk about. And these are things that are really affecting our people. And also, I think you had mentioned something about what do we do before it gets to that point. How many of us are practicing self-care?
Right, yeah.
Because that's a really, listen, I have looked at my phone probably about 60 times since I've been here today. And that's the problem, that the cell phones, but I'm not practicing the self-care that I need to. Last week, I had to literally just shut my phone down, okay? And a lot of times if we don't practice that self-care, we tend to get, hypertension. We tend to go, we get anxious. We get a lot of anxiety. So I would say awareness, speaking to our family and loved ones, having those candid and challenging conversations, and then practicing self-care so that you can stay atop when you start to feel depressed or when you start to get anxiety. I saw one hand over here first.
Yes. I think what I was thinking back when we first raised the question about where does it start or how do we uncheck stress and trauma. For me, I'm a trauma chaplain. I do pastoral care with women with addictions and people with disabilities. And I too, with your inspiration, Jackie, started an MSW a year ago.
Awesome.
I told y'all I was gonna do it.
Awesome.
Meet your son too, as Aunt Jackie.
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
Yes.
All right.
And so one of the things in learning in my own life, with my sister being diagnosed bipolar, not realizing that much earlier in our life, and her trying to commit suicide several times, and not knowing what to do, we would go find her, and I would drag her to the hospital, and they would say something, and then a few hours later, I'm taking her home. I was like, is that it? We did that 4 times before I got her into Princeton House. Before then, after Princeton House, I'm picking her up, dragging her to day programs. My sister, the diva, now I'm taking lint balls out of her hair just to get off the couch and get her to the place. And we worked for years, and I had to take her daughter and keep her daughter with us for a year and a half, who now came to visit me yesterday. I'm so proud of her. She's a chef, traveling all over the place, doing her thing, just is beautiful. And my sister is stable doing real estate in Atlanta. But prior to all that, not realizing how much the alcoholism, the family violence that we grew up in would impact her later, would impact my 4 brothers, and then me and myself. And sometimes I would wonder why I would have this low-grade kind of anxiety happen. I would get real anxious about stuff real quick, a little OCD about where things need to be. And that's because of the upbringing. Now understanding that, and I use EAP like I use my yearly thing. I'm like, well, I'm having a moment. That's what I tell them. I'm having a moment. I need to see need my EAP, 3 or 4 visits, and if I feel like I still need, but I just do that on a regular. I use it every year like I go to any other doctor.
Now, is your sister, speaking of maintenance, is she on meds?
She was on, well, when we were watching together, she was on meds. Now in Atlanta, I can tell when things aren't well, and I'll fly down and hang out with her a little bit, and my niece is down there, her daughter is down there as well, and so we sort of hover a little bit, but when she stays consistent, she gets a little happy, or not, I shouldn't say happy, she gets content, I think she can manage, and sometimes she slips off, and then we need to go and remind her that she needs to stay the course. And so it's just been eye-opening, one, remembering that incident with her, coming into the work that I'm doing now, and my son, who I want to, Aunt Jackie, to speak to, was at Carnegie Mellon. Son is brilliant, always been very quiet, always had a little anxiety as a kid, and I said, I gotta keep an eye on that. And sure enough, 3 years at Carnegie Mellon on a full ride, only male black student in the School of Architecture of 150 students admitted that year. The 3rd year I went to pick up our son for Thanksgiving, I didn't even recognize it. The look. He looked disheveled, he looked like he was doing some things that he needed to do. And I was like, you know what, the devil's a liar. You done, this is done. I don't care how free it is, it's not worth your life. And we pulled him and brought him home. And for a year, counseling. That's it. I didn't ask him. I know he was 20. I'm signing you up. You're gonna live here, you're gonna eat here, you going here for a year. And then now he's at NJIT and he's doing fine and reacclimating himself. But I just think we just need to be really proactive with our family and with our children. I say in the pulpit, I say, yes, as a cancer survivor, as someone with anxiety, I will take my drugs and pray. They all come together, we all good. You know? And so I just encourage us to look at the signs, look at our own life, the trauma in our own life, and really, if it doesn't make sense, talk about it. If we haven't touched back on those things that, if we grew up in households where there was alcoholism and abuse and neglect and all kind of verbals, this, that, take a moment and assess how it might be affecting us right now.
Because, you know, our childhood experiences, you know, some people may argue differently, but our childhood, for me, I believe that what we experience as children, it affects who we become as adults, all right? And it shapes us, and it molds us. And I don't know about anybody in here, but I didn't have the best childhood. I don't know too many people who can say, my childhood was perfect. Because we've all dealt with some dramas and traumas. And what did we do? We put Band-Aids on them. And we don't deal. And then when you're 50 years old and you're wondering why I can't get along with my husband, but not thinking that, you know what, my mom used to, whatever, to my father, hey, it grows up in us. This is something that we're introduced to. So we have to deal with it, and we have to ask those questions. So thank you for that. Thank you. There was a hand, and I see a hand over here.
Thank you. Those specific questions, hey, what's going on with you, this, that, and the other, and they refuse to answer. Or they answer you and say, there's nothing going on, but you still see that there's something going on. How do you then handle that whole picture?
I think it depends on who the person is in your life. So, for instance, I'll use my mom as an example. So, I may have had to say to her a number of times, like, okay, Mom, well, are you still seeing your therapist? Or even before, because that's what you're talking about, before a person will even engage. Right. So even before.